I think I want to give an overview of what we're going to be covering. Many of you may have seen the documentary series that featured this little creature who was found in the Atacama Desert of Chile in 2003 and by a treasure hunter. And this was then subsequently taken to Spain with no knowledge of ours. We were not involved in that. It's become a big controversy that it was taken out of Chile as an antiquity. It is estimated to have lived around 100 to 130 years ago in this remote, dry desert area that has a very harsh environment. It gets very hot during the day, extremely cold at night in the winters, called the Atacama Desert. And when I first saw it was in 2009. I was in near Barcelona doing a presentation to about 2,000 people, and someone came up to me and said, there's a man here who very much needs to speak to you. And I was shown a photograph of this being. I immediately knew that it was something unusual. And we met, I investigated it, I held it personally. It fits in my hand. It's 6 inches long. So I have big hands, nevertheless. It fit in the palm of my hand. And I was frankly rather astonished. Being a medical doctor, I'm an emergency and trauma doctor. I've seen virtually every kind of human, and I've delivered a couple of hundred infants. And to see something this small that was so perfect, and yet did not look human, certainly got my curiosity going. But we really weren't given access to it medically until about 2012. And in September 2012, I'm the principal investigator on this project who went over there, and with some assistance, we got some CAT scans, x-rays, which we will also show you. Well, we can't show we can't show those here, but we have them on our website at seriousdisclosure.com. So if you want to see those, you just go to seriousdisclosure.com and look under the evidence part, and you'll see there's a whole section of the CAT scans and x-rays and photographs of this little being. So you can look at those as we're speaking today. What happened is that we wanted to get some studies on the DNA. So we clipped the anterior right lateral ribs, which, by the way, this little being has 10 ribs instead of 12, which is unusual. It has 4 skull bones instead of 6 like humans have. All kinds of anomalies with the skeletal structure. Just so you know, it also has some fascia or connective tissue that had dried out. It was very desiccated. And it had dried out, but you could still see where there was some connective tissue, a cartilaginous type material. In the skull, we were able to extract some of the meninges, the lining of the brain, and what have you. There's no question it's an actual organism that had lived out in the desert at some point. And we simply didn't know what it was. Now, for the record, because it's been misrepresented in the New York Times in the last week, on March 22nd, this fraudulent report came out, and I'll get to that in a moment. But it's been misrepresented that we were calling it an alien. If you go through everything that's in the Sirius documentary and everything that I have ever written and said, and we have a YouTube video presentation on this that's had 1 million views already, I never called it an alien or an ET. I said it's unusual and we do not know what it is, and we need to have it investigated independently and thoroughly. Well, around this time, a man named Gary Nolan, who is the Harris Chair professor at Stanford University with a PhD, and his focus is immunology and genetics and what have you. And he has dozens of postdocs who work under him. I've been in his lab, reached out, and he had informed me that he had had an ET contact experience personally, that Dr. Nolan had had contact with ETs, and that he was very interested in the subject, and that he would be happy to be sort of an honest broker to do the genetic work on it. Many people in the last week have said, how did you get mixed up with Stanford, which has SRI and all these other entities that are connected to covert government contracting? Didn't you know that they would submarine this? I said, well, I trusted Gary Nolan to do a good job because I felt he was sincere and he had the credentials, and he also had the equipment that's very, very specialized to do the genetic studies on this specimen, which we knew was quite unusual. Well, during this time period, but we of course, under forensic sterile field, for example, like you would in the emergency department in a rape kit or a murder case or a stabbing or a shooting, we took the evidence and did it under forensic chain of command. It never lost came out from our control and possession until it was handed off to Dr. Nolan. And Gary took it then into his lab to do the genetic research. He immediately was very excited about what he found. He found that there was almost 10% of the genetic material not matching to humans. Now, people go, well, what does that mean? A monkey, if you go to your zoo and go look at what a chimpanzee looks like, or a gorilla, they are 98 to 98.5% identical to humans. So this becomes a very strange now, because that is a very low percentage of matching. Because I don't know the specifics, but a fruit fly has a large number of their genes the same as humans, et cetera, and so on. A guinea pig has a very large number of genes the same as humans. So for it to be less matching, even if it was 98% matching to a human, this would be very, very unusual. And so he said, well, this is something very anomalous. And he had shared this information with a man who has asked to remain anonymous at this time because of the academic scandal that this has become. Now, let me be very clear. The man that I am referring to, I have checked his bona fides. He is one of the top geneticists in the world. He was asked to actually work with Watson and Crick, who discovered the DNA molecule, at Cold Spring Harbor in Long Island. And at one point, his own PhD supervisors were Nobel Prize winners. He has a PhD in genetics from Caltech and literally invented the crystallography of DNA and has done pioneering research for decades and is a man of enormous stature in the DNA field. He contacted me this past Sunday morning and said, this is an academic scandal of the first order of magnitude. And just to give you an idea of how far off the paper, which is in this journal, Genome Research. Now, this is one of the most prestigious scientific journals in the world. This paper appeared March 22nd. Now, that is a peer-reviewed journal. Now, what that means in America is that it's supposed to have gone through the review of people competent to examine the data and also to reach any conclusions so that it could be accepted or not accepted. When I spoke to this world-renowned geneticist, he said, first thing out of his mouth was, any peer review of this paper that Nolan had done would have received a 0 ranking, 0 grade.